A crowded New York train station. A pregnant woman stands inches from the edge while her millionaire husband screams that she ruined his life. One shove, one scream, and her body tilts toward the tracks just as the train barrels in. But a stranger's hand catches her in the final second. What follows is a storm of lies, power, and redemption as the man who tried to end her becomes the one who loses everything. Stay with me because this story will take you from chaos to justice, and you won't believe who that stranger truly is. Tell me what time you are watching and where you're tuning in from, because this one will leave you breathless. And if you love stories where truth defeats power, hit that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. A crowded New York train station. A pregnant woman stands inches from the edge while her millionaire husband screams that she ruined his life. One shove, one scream, and her body tilts toward the tracks just as the train barrels in. But a stranger's hand catches her in the final second. What follows is a storm of lies, power, and redemption as the man who tried to end her becomes the one who loses everything. Stay with me because this story will take you from case to justice, and you won't believe who that stranger truly is. Tell me what time you're watching and where you're tuning in from, because this one will leave you breathless. And if you love stories where truth defeats power, hit that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The silk sheets felt like a prison. Claire Brennan woke to an empty bed, her hand reaching across cold Egyptian cotton where her husband should have been. 7 months pregnant, she struggled to sit up, her swollen belly making every movement difficult. The penthouse bedroom glowed with morning light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. 40 stories below, New York City hummed with life. Up here, Claire felt trapped. She pressed her palm against her stomach, feeling the baby kick. "Good morning, little one," she whispered. "Daddy left early again." Derek had been leaving early and returning late for 3 months. Business, he always said, his tech company, Brennan Innovations, was expanding. She should understand. Claire shuffled to the closet and noticed Derek's navy suit jacket hanging askew. Unusual, Derek was meticulous. She reached to straighten it and felt paper crinkle in the pocket. Hotel receipts, 3 of them, from the Mandarin Oriental, dated over the past 2 weeks, all charged to his personal card, always checking in at 9 evening, checking out at midnight. The baby kicked harder, as if sensing her distress. Mrs. Brennan Elena, their housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Brennan called. He'll be home for lunch." Claire forced a smile, crushing the receipts in her fist. "Thank you, Elena." She stared at her reflection. When had she become this person 3 years ago? She'd been Claire Morrison, a rising marketing star. She'd had friends, ambitions, a life that belonged to her. Then Derek Brennan walked into her conference room. Self-made millionaire at 32, brilliant, charismatic, devastatingly handsome. He'd pursued her intensely. Flowers every day, trips to Paris, a yacht proposal after 6 months. Everyone said she was lucky. Now, in a $12,000 robe in an $8 million penthouse, carrying a child of a man who barely looked at her anymore. Claire wondered what luck really meant. The elevator chimed. Derek was home. Claire shoved the receipts into her pocket and went to meet him, practicing her smile. He stood in the living room, scrolling at his phone. 35, 6 feet tall, angular features that photographed well. He looked up as she entered, his expression blank, as if he'd forgotten who she was. "Claire," the warmth sounded rehearsed. "How are you feeling?" "We're fine," she kept her hands relaxed. "Elena said you're staying for lunch. I have a 2 o'clock meeting, but I wanted to check on you." He kissed her forehead without looking at her. "You look tired. Are you sleeping enough?" "It's hard when you're not here." Something flickered in his eyes. "I told you, this acquisition is critical. I'm at the office constantly." Claire pulled out the receipts and set them on the coffee table. "The Mandarin Oriental isn't your office." The silence felt like falling. Derek picked up the receipts, examined them casually, and set them down. "You're going through my pockets now." His voice was soft, almost gentle. That's when Claire knew she'd made a mistake. "I was straightening your jacket. They fell out. And your first thought was to accuse me." He moved closer. Not threatening exactly, but deliberate. "Claire, sweetheart, I'm worried about you. This paranoia isn't healthy, especially for the baby. I'm not paranoid. These are receipts from a hotel, multiple nights, business dinners that ran late. I meet investors who prefer privacy. The hotel has excellent conference rooms. You know how business works. At midnight, his hand dropped. Are you calling me a liar? I'm asking for an explanation. I just gave you one. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, jaw tightening. I need to go. We'll talk tonight. And Claire, the pregnancy hormones are making you emotional. Maybe call Dr. Harrison. Adjust your medication. He left before she could respond. Claire stood in the vast living room, surrounded by furniture that cost more than most cars, feeling utterly alone. Her phone sat on the table. She scrolled past names of people she used to know. Derek had gently, persistently discouraged those relationships. They didn't understand. They were jealous. Only he could protect her. Claire deleted the thought and dialed a number she'd saved 6 months ago, Marcus Webb, a private investigator recommended by a former coworker. Webb Investigations. Mr. Webb, my name is Claire Brennan. I need to hire you to investigate my husband. 4 days later, Marcus Webb sent an encrypted email with photos. Claire opened it in a Starbucks, using public Wi-Fi. The first photo showed Derek and a blonde woman entering the Mandarin Oriental. Claire recognized her immediately, Vanessa Price, Derek's chief operating officer, the woman he constantly praised. The woman with her hand on his back as they walked inside. More photos followed. Derek and Vanessa at a restaurant, getting into his car, entering his office at 10 at night. The final photo was time-stamped yesterday, Derek's hand cupping Vanessa's face in a parking garage, her arms around his neck. The kiss was unmistakable. Claire paid to have the tablet wiped and left it in the bathroom. She walked home in a daze, her mind churning through implications. How long since before the wedding? Did everyone know she was the fool the baby kicked? Claire stopped walking and pressed both hands to her belly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. But she wasn't staying. She had proof. She would confront him. Derek's office building was 6 blocks away. Claire walked, planning her words. She would be calm, factual. Tell him the marriage was over, that she wanted a fair divorce. The lobby of Brennan Innovations was glass and steel. Claire signed in, the guard smiling. Surprising Mr. Brennan. Something like that. The executive assistant looked surprised. Mrs. Brennan, he's in a meeting with Miss Price. Claire walked past her and opened Derek's door. Derek stood at his desk with Vanessa, both leaning over architectural plans. They looked up, expressions shifting through surprise. Claire, Derek's voice held warning. I'm in a meeting. I know. Claire closed the door. Hello, Vanessa? The other woman smiled coolly. Claire, lovely to see you. How are you feeling? Tired of being lied to? Claire pulled out her phone, showing the photos. I hired a private investigator. Want to see what he found? Absolute silence. Vanessa's smile froze. Derek's expression went blank. Claire, put the phone down. His voice was soft, dangerous. Whatever you think you saw, I saw you kissing her. I saw weeks of evidence of your affair. Vanessa stepped forward, sympathetic. Claire, I think you're under stress. Pregnancy can be difficult. And Derek's told me how worried he is. Don't insult my intelligence when I have proof. Derek moved around the desk, movements controlled, predatory. You hired someone to spy on me. Do you understand how unstable that makes you seem? I hired someone because my husband is a liar. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard. You need to leave, now, before you say something you'll regret. Claire tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. She saw it then, the mask was gone. No more charming smiles, just cold rage. Let go of me. You're my wife. You don't get to embarrass me in my office. He leaned close, whispering, you have nothing without me. Claire, no job, no money, no friends I haven't approved. You're completely dependent. So before you make threats, remember what you have to lose. He released her. Claire stumbled back, cradling her arm. A red mark was forming. Vanessa watched with cool detachment. Derek, maybe we should reschedule, she said. Good idea. Derek straightened his tie. Claire, go home. Rest. We'll talk tonight when you're calmer. I'm leaving you. I'm filing for divorce. Something flickered in his eyes. No, you're not. You can't stop me, he smiled, and it was terrifying. Claire, sweetheart, you have no idea what I can do, but you're about to find out. Claire left his office, past the assistant who pretended not to hear, past curious employees. She made it to the elevator before shaking, to the lobby before tears blurred her vision, outside before the weight crashed down. She had no money of her own. The apartment was Derek's name. Her phone was his family plan. Even her coat, he'd bought it. Her phone buzzed. Derek, take the train home. I need the car. We'll discuss your behavior tonight. Not an apology, a command. Claire looked at the bruises forming on her wrist, pulled her sleeve down, and walked toward Grand Central Station. She didn't know it yet, but she would never make it home. Grand Central Station swallowed Claire whole. The terminal's vaulted ceiling soared overhead, painted with glowing constellations. Thousands of people flowed through, businessmen, tourists, students. The information board clicked as times updated. Claire stood near track 17, one hand on her aching back, clutching her phone. Derek's text, take the 4:15 Metro North to Westchester. Meet me at Rye Station. We need to talk away from the city. She should have refused, should have gone to a hotel, called a lawyer. Instead, some foolish part believed they could work this out. The crowd pressed close as the train prepared to board. Claire moved toward the platform edge, trying to see the departure board. Someone jostled her. The baby kicked in protest. Then she saw Derek, moving through the crowd, his face cold and calculating. Derek. She raised her hand, relief flooding through her. He grabbed her arm, the bruised wrist, and pulled her away from the crowd. What the hell were you thinking, coming to my office? I needed to confront you. You humiliated me in front of my COO. His voice was vicious. You threatened my reputation based on paranoid fantasies. They're not fantasies. I have proof. Proof. He laughed harshly. You have photos that can be explained away. Meanwhile, I have 3 years of documented mental instability, therapy records, medications, witnesses who will testify you have been erratic since pregnancy began. Claire's blood turned to ice. You wouldn't. I already have. He showed her an email draft to his lawyer. One click. Claire, I'll have you declared an unfit mother. I'll argue postpartum psychosis started early. That you're dangerous. I'll get full custody. You'll be lucky to get supervised visitation. No court would side with an unemployed woman with anxiety medication against a successful businessman with unlimited resources. He leaned closer. You made a mistake today. You challenged me. Now you'll learn what happens when you forget your place. The train announcement echoed track 17, 4:15 Metro North to Rye, now boarding. The platform surged. Derek's hand tightened. We're getting on that train, and somewhere along the way, you're going to have a terrible accident. Pregnant women are so fragile. Claire tried to pull away. You're insane. No, I'm practical. You've become a liability. You threaten my business, my reputation, my relationship with Vanessa. I can't have you making accusations. It's easier this way. Tragic, but easier. He pulled her toward the yellow safety line. The crowd pressed from behind. The train waited. Doors open, engine rumbling. Beyond the platform edge, the rails gleamed. Derek, please. Claire's voice broke. I won't say anything. I'll sign whatever you want. Too late. You should have stayed quiet, should have been grateful. He positioned her at the edge, his body blocking the crowd's view. You've forced my hand. The departure whistle blew. Passengers surged forward. In the chaos, Derek's hand moved from her arm to her shoulder. Claire felt the shift, the preparation for force. She opened her mouth to scream. Before sound came, Derek shoved her hard, both hands against her shoulders, pushing her toward the track. Time fractured. Claire felt her feet leave the platform, felt gravity take hold, saw the dark space between platform and train rushing up, heard screaming. Then a hand caught her arm. Strong fingers wrapped her wrist, yanking backward hard enough to wrench her shoulder. She stumbled into someone's chest. Air knocked from her lungs. Strong arms steadied her. The train's brakes shrieked. People screamed. Someone shouted for security. Claire blinked and looked up at the man who'd caught her. Early 40s, gray at his temples, sharp blue eyes, Expensive charcoal coat, quiet authority. Don't move. You're in shock. Just breathe. She slipped. Derek's voice cut through. My God, Claire, you almost fell. You need to be more careful. Claire turned. Derek stood 3 feet away, face a perfect mask of concern. If she hadn't felt his hands pushing, she'd have believed him. The man holding her spoke over her head. That's not what happened. Derek's mask flickered. Excuse me. I saw you push her. The man helped Claire sit on a bench, keeping his body between her and Derek. I saw the whole thing. The crowd stopped. Phones came out. People began recording. Derek's story crumbled as witnesses murmured. That's annoying, Derek said, voice losing confidence. She's my wife. Why would I? That's exactly what I'm wondering. The man pulled out his phone, calling 911. I need police and ambulance at Grand Central. Track 17. Eon. Attempted assault on a pregnant woman. Derek's face went white, then red. You have no idea what you're doing. Do you know who I am? Derek Brennan, CEO of Brennan Innovations. Net worth $50 million. The man's voice was clinical. I'm Michael Hartford, CEO of Hartford Capital. Net worth $3 billion. I know exactly who you are, and I'm testifying that I watched you attempt to murder your pregnant wife. Sirens began in the distance. Security guards pushed through. Transit police arrived. Someone helped Claire to her feet. She saw the recording light on a nearby phone, capturing everything. She looked at Derek and saw fear in his eyes for the first time. Not concern, pure fear. Claire, he started toward her, but Michael Hartford stepped between them. Don't. Police are coming. I suggest you don't say anything without your lawyer. The baby kicked. Claire pressed her hand to her stomach and whispered, We're okay. We're going to be okay. As police led Derek away in handcuffs, his perfect image shattered by cameras and witnesses and security footage, Claire finally let herself cry. The ambulance ride blurred into fluorescent lights and medical jargon. Claire lay on a gurney, electrodes on her belly monitoring the baby's heartbeat. Her blood pressure kept climbing 140/95, then 150/100. Mount Sinai's emergency department was organized chaos. Claire was wheeled to a private room. A nurse named Jessica began intake. Do you feel safe going home tonight? Jessica asked gently. Are you in danger from your husband? I don't know, Claire whispered. A woman in her mid-40s entered, white coat reading Dr. Ann Shepard, emergency medicine. Mrs. Brennan, I'm Dr. Shepard. I'll examine you and the baby. The examination was thorough. Dr. Shepard measured her belly, listened to the heartbeat, checked blood pressure. She photographed the bruises on Claire's wrist. These marks are consistent with forceful gripping. How did you get them? My husband grabbed me earlier today at his office. In the train station incident, he pushed me. He tried to... Claire's voice broke. He tried to kill me. Dr. Shepard set down her clipboard. I'm documenting everything carefully. Your injuries, your statement, the baby's condition. This can be used as evidence if you press charges. There were witnesses. Someone filmed it. Good. The doctor squeezed her hand. You did nothing wrong. Mrs. Brennan, this is not your fault. The words broke something in Claire. She sobbed, deep and shaking. The baby kicked frantically. Dr. Shepard held her hand until it passed. A knock interrupted. Mrs. Brennan, I'm Detective Rachel Gomez, NYPD. I need your statement. The detective was early 40s, dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes. She sat with a notepad. Tell me what happened today. Claire recounted everything: hotel receipts, confronting Derek, his threats, the text to Grand Central, the push. Detective Gomez wrote it all, occasionally asking questions. Michael Hartford already gave his statement. It corroborates yours. Detective Gomez looked up. We have security footage. The angle isn't perfect, but it shows your husband's hands on your shoulders and you falling forward before Mr. Hartford intervened. So you believe me? Mrs. Brennan, I've worked domestic violence 15 years. I believe you. The question is building a case strong enough to stick. She closed her notebook. Your husband posted bail. He's released with conditions: no contact, surrender passport, GPS monitoring. But men like Derek Brennan don't go quietly. They have resources, lawyers, influence. He'll fight this hard. What do I do? First, don't go home. Do you have family friends? Claire shook her head. Derek made me cut ties with everyone. Then we'll find you a place. There are shelters for domestic violence victims. Detective Gomez handed her a card. My direct number. Call anytime. I won't let him hurt you again. No, after the detective left, the curtain opened again. Michael Hartford stood there, looking concerned. I wanted to check on you. You saved my life. Claire's voice was hoarse. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to. He pulled up a stool. I did what anyone should do. What I wish someone had done for my sister. Your sister, Michael's expression darkened. 10 years ago, her husband killed her, beat her to death while I was on a business trip. She'd called 2 weeks before, said she was scared, asked to stay with me. I told her she was overreacting, that every marriage has problems. He met Claire's eyes. I've regretted that every day since. When I saw your husband push you, I swore I wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Claire felt tears building. I'm so sorry. Her name was Catherine. She was funny and smart and deserved better. Just like you. Michael stood. Your husband will fight this. He'll use every resource to discredit you. But you're not alone. I'll make sure you have the best lawyers, the best support, whatever you need. Why? Because Catherine didn't have anyone. Because the system failed her. But maybe I can make sure you and your baby survive. He handed her a business card. My personal number. Call if you need anything. And Claire document everything. The truth is your weapon. After he left, Claire held both cards like lifelines. Outside, New York City glittered. Somewhere Derek was planning his next move. The baby kicked. Claire pressed her hand there. I won't let him hurt you. Whatever it takes, I'll fight. Dr. Shepard returned with a manila envelope. I've documented everything. Sealed copy for you. Keep it safe. Thank you. There's a domestic violence advocate outside to help find housing. You're not going back to that penthouse. Dr. Shepard squeezed her shoulder. You're doing the right thing. Claire left Mount Sinai at 11, escorted by an advocate named Patricia, who drove her to a women's shelter in Brooklyn. The building was nondescript, address carefully guarded, inside clean, safe, but institutional. Shared rooms, strict rules, other women's trauma humming beneath everything. Claire lay on a narrow bed in a shared room, listening to someone crying down the hall. Her phone buzzed with messages she didn't read. She knew they'd be from Derek or his lawyers, crafting the narrative that she was unstable, dangerous. Tomorrow she'd start fighting back. Tonight she just needed to survive the fear that his hands might reach through the darkness. Morning came too early. Claire woke to fluorescent lights and industrial coffee smell, body aching from the narrow mattress. She checked her phone, 47 missed calls, 63 texts, 12 voicemails, most from unknown numbers, Derek's lawyers, but 3 from Detective Gomez, 1 from Michael Hartford. She called the detective. Mrs. Brennan, how are you? I've been better. What's happening? Your husband's legal team is moving aggressively. They're claiming you have mental instability history, that you slipped and he tried to catch you, that Mr. Hartford misinterpreted. A pause. They're also arguing that hiring a private investigator shows premeditation for false accusation. They're spinning you as a gold digger destroying a successful man. Claire's stomach clenched. That's insane. It's strategy, and effective if we can't counter it. I need to ask difficult questions. Have you been treated for anxiety? Yes. Derek insisted I see a therapist after we married. He said I was too stressed. Medications. Low-dose anxiety medication. The doctor said it was pregnancy safe. That's what they'll use. They'll paint you as emotionally unstable, paranoid, possibly suffering early postpartum psychosis. We need to get ahead of this. Detective Gomez's voice became firm. I'm setting up a meeting with the DA's office. We have witnesses, footage, your injuries, but these cases are hard when the defendant has resources. You need to prepare for a long fight. I don't have money. Derek controlled everything. Michael Hartford called me. He's offering to fund your legal defense. Top attorneys, civil suit, restraining orders, everything. Claire closed her eyes. Why is he doing this? Because he believes you. That's rare in these cases. Take the help. You'll need it. The DA meeting happened 3 days later. Claire sat with Detective Gomez, Assistant District Attorney James Crawford, and a defense attorney Michael had hired Rebecca Thorne, who specialized in domestic violence. Let's be clear about what we're facing, Ada Crawford said, spreading files across the table. Derek Brennan retained Stuart Grant, one of New York's best. Grant's strategy is obvious: you're mentally unstable. The incident was an accident. You're extorting money. That's not true, Claire protested. I know, but truth and what we prove in court are different. Crawford pulled up security footage on a laptop. This is from Grand Central. Watch. The video showed the platform from overhead. Claire could see herself and Derek, but their bodies were partially obscured. Then Derek's movement, his hands on her shoulders and Claire falling. The angle made it look almost like she'd leaned forward and Derek tried to catch her. That's not what happened. I believe you. But from a jury's perspective, the footage is ambiguous. Without Michael Hartford's testimony, which Grant will try to discredit, Rebecca Thorne interrupted. He'll argue Hartford is a business rival. He'll bring up Hartford Capital's failed acquisition bid for Brennan Innovations 2 years ago. Can they do that? They'll try. Whether the judge allows it is another question. Rebecca pulled out files. Here's what favors us: Dr. Shepard's documentation showing injuries consistent with assault, bruises on your wrist from earlier, multiple witnesses, and your testimony. My testimony. You're the victim and primary witness. Your account of Derek's behavior, the threats, the affair, it paints a picture of capability for violence. Rebecca met her eyes. But understand, taking the stand means they'll tear apart your life. Every therapy session, every argument, every weakness. Grant will try to make you look unstable, unreliable, greedy. Claire thought about the hotel receipts, the investigators' photos, Derek's whispered threat. I'll do it. I'll testify. Good, Ada Crawford said, because we're filing charges. Attempted murder, assault, reckless endangerment. Bail conditions include no contact and surrendering passport. But Claire, men like Derek don't accept defeat. He'll fight with everything. The prediction proved accurate within 24 hours. Derek's counteroffensive was swift and devastating. First came leaked medical records. Claire's therapy notes appeared on gossip websites, curated excerpts about her anxiety, difficulty adjusting to marriage, irrational fears about Derek's fidelity. Out of context, she sounded paranoid and unstable. Then media interviews. Vanessa Price appeared on morning TV, crying delicately. Derek loved her so much. He was trying to get her help. Now she's accusing him of this terrible thing because she can't accept needing treatment. The affair photos Claire's investigator had taken mysteriously disappeared from her cloud storage. When Rebecca tried to subpoena them, the investigator's office had been broken into, files stolen, no arrests made. Claire's former friend Lauren Mitchell appeared on a podcast, reluctantly admitting Claire had always been dramatic and attention-seeking. The host pressed for details. Lauren provided them exaggerated college stories, embellished accounts of Claire's insecurity, suggestions that maybe Claire had fabricated everything. The custody threat came next. Derek filed emergency motions arguing Claire's mental instability made her unfit for their unborn child. His evidence theft of hotel receipts, hiring a private investigator, time in a shelter unable to provide stable home, sworn statements from Vanessa and Brennan, Innovations employees describing Claire's erratic behavior. Rebecca fought the motion fiercely. But the judge granted Derek supervised visitation once the baby was born and ordered Claire to undergo psychiatric evaluation. This is insane, Claire said after the hearing. I'm the victim. He tried to kill me. How is he getting custody rights? Because he has unlimited money and the best lawyers money can buy, Rebecca said grimly. The system favors fathers who can afford to fight. We're not giving up. But prepare for this to get worse. It got worse that night. Someone posted Claire's temporary address on social media. Within minutes, it was everywhere: Reddit, Twitter, Facebook. Messages flooded in death threats, accusations, vile suggestions. Patricia moved Claire to a different facility immediately. He's trying to isolate you, make you feel unsafe. That's how abusers maintain control. Claire sat in the car watching city lights blur past, feeling the full weight. Derek hadn't just tried to kill her body. He was destroying her credibility, her support, Her ability to fight. Her phone buzzed. Michael Hartford. Don't read the comments. Don't look at social media. Don't engage. He's winning, Claire said hollowly. He's making everyone believe I'm crazy. No, he's desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. We wait for him to make one we can use. Michael paused. I've hired private security for you. Former Secret Service. They'll keep you safe while we build the case. Why are you doing all this? I know enough, and I have resources I should have used to help Catherine but didn't. Let me use them now. His voice was firm. You're not giving up, because if you do, he'll know he can get away with anything, and the next woman won't be as lucky. After the call, Claire looked at her reflection in the car window. She looked exhausted, scared, young, but underneath, something else was building. Anger, determination, absolute refusal to let Derek Brennan destroy her. She pressed her hand to her belly. Your father tried to kill us, but we survived, and we're going to make sure he pays. Outside, the city glittered with possibility and danger. Somewhere Derek was planning his next move, but for the first time since the train platform, Claire was planning too. The psychiatric evaluation happened on a gray Tuesday morning. The psychologist was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual skeptical expression. Dr. Raymond Pierce had been practicing for 20 years, and Claire could tell within the first 5 minutes that he'd already made up his mind about her. His office was sterile white walls, uncomfortable chairs, a desk positioned so he looked down at her. Claire sat with her hands folded over her pregnant belly, trying to appear calm while her heart raced. Mrs. Brennan, let's begin with some basic questions. Dr. Pierce clicked his pen repeatedly, a nervous habit that set Claire's teeth on edge. Do you often feel that people are against you? Claire thought carefully before answering. I feel that my husband's legal team is working against me. Yes, but that's based on observable fact, not paranoia. Dr. Pierce made a note. And how would you characterize your emotional state during the pregnancy? I've experienced stress and anxiety, particularly after discovering my husband's affair and his attempt to kill me at the train station. Have you experienced paranoid thoughts during your pregnancy? I've had concerns about my safety, which I believe are justified given that someone pushed me toward an oncoming train. More notes. The pen clicked faster. Would you say your emotions are more intense than other people's? Claire felt the trap closing. I think my emotions are appropriate to my circumstances. I'm pregnant. My husband tried to murder me, and I'm fighting to keep custody of my child. Most people would be emotional in this situation. Have you ever had thoughts of harming yourself or others? No, never. Claire's voice was firm. I want to protect my baby and myself. That's the opposite of wanting harm. Dr. Pierce leaned back in his chair, studying her over his glasses. Mrs. Brennan, I'm going to be frank with you. Your medical history shows a pattern of anxiety, depression, and emotional instability. You've been on medication for years. You hired a private investigator to spy on your husband, which suggests obsessive behavior. You made a scene at his workplace, accusing him of infidelity without concrete proof. I had proof. I had photographs, and photographs that mysteriously disappeared. Dr. Pierce interrupted, which could suggest they never existed, or that you misinterpreted innocent business interactions as something more sinister. Claire felt her blood pressure rising. She forced herself to breathe slowly. Dr. Pierce, are you suggesting I imagined my husband's affair, that I imagined him pushing me at the train station, despite multiple witnesses and security footage? I'm suggesting that pregnancy hormones, combined with pre-existing mental health issues, may have caused you to misinterpret a series of unfortunate events. He set down his pen. Your husband reaching for you as you lost your balance near a train platform, a business colleague being friendly, late-night work meetings being characterized as something inappropriate. That's not what happened. But isn't it possible, Mrs. Brennan, that your anxiety disorder has made you see threats where none exist, that your fear of abandonment documented in your therapy records from before your marriage has manifested as paranoid accusations against a successful, devoted husband? Claire's hands clenched in her lap. She could feel the baby kicking frantically, responding to her distress. My husband grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave bruises earlier that day. That's documented by Dr. Shepard at Mount Sinai. He then pushed me toward a moving train. That's witnessed by dozens of people, including Michael Hartford, who has no reason to lie. These aren't paranoid delusions. They're facts. Facts, or your interpretation of events filtered through an anxious, emotionally unstable mindset. Dr. Pierce picked up his pen again. I'm going to recommend continued psychiatric treatment and monitoring. In my professional opinion, you're experiencing significant mental distress that could impact your ability to care for an infant. Claire felt the room tilting. You're saying I'm an unfit mother. I'm saying you need help, extensive help, and that your child's welfare should be the primary concern. He closed his notebook with finality. We're done for today. Mrs. Brennan, my report will be submitted to the court within 48 hours. Claire stood on shaking legs. You made up your mind before I walked in here. Didn't you? Derek's lawyers told you what to think, what to write. How much did he pay you? Dr. Pierce's expression didn't change. That's exactly the kind of paranoid accusation that concerns me. Mrs. Brennan, I suggest you discuss these feelings with your therapist. Claire left the office feeling like she'd been gutted. She sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying not to have a complete breakdown. Her security detail waited patiently, pretending not to notice her tears. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She should have ignored it, but some masochistic impulse made her answer. The text read, "You should give up. Take the settlement Derek's offering. Otherwise, you'll lose your baby and end up in a psychiatric facility. Save yourself while you can." Claire stared at the message, her vision blurring. Derek was offering a settlement now. $2 million, a confidentiality agreement, and she'd disappear from his life forever. No custody, no visits, no contact with your own child. She'd be erased from Jonah's life as if she'd never existed. Rebecca Thorne had advised her to consider it seriously. Sometimes survival means knowing when you're outgunned. There's no shame in choosing to live. But Claire kept thinking about Michael's sister, Catherine, about the women at the shelter who'd believed their abusers' promises of letting them go peacefully, who'd signed away their rights and their voices, some of whom ended up dead anyway when their abusers decided even that wasn't enough. She thought about the baby growing inside her, her son who deserved a mother strong enough to fight for him, who deserved to grow up knowing that truth mattered, that justice was possible, that powerful men who hurt people could be held accountable. She thought about all the women who would come after her if Derek got away with this. The next employee he'd isolate and control. The next girlfriend he'd gaslight and abuse. The next wife he'd try to kill when she became inconvenient. Rebecca Sullivan's words echoed in her mind. I spent 10 years living with the knowledge that my silence enabled Derek to hurt you. Nothing was worth that guilt. Claire deleted the threatening text message without responding, her hands steadier than they'd been all day. Then she called Rebecca Thorne. I'm not taking the settlement, she said when the lawyer answered. I don't care what that psychiatrist writes in his report. I don't care how hard Derek fights or how much money he spends. I'm not giving up my son, and I'm not letting Derek Brennan get away with attempted murder. There was a pause on the other end. Then Rebecca Thorne's voice, warm with respect. Good, because we just got some news that changes everything. Michael Hartford is on the other line. We need to conference him in. Can you come to my office right now? What kind of news? The kind that might finally give us the weapon we need to destroy Derek's defense completely. Get here as fast as you can. Claire started her car, adrenaline replacing despair. Her phone buzzed again, this time Michael Hartford calling, directly. Don't give up yet, he said without preamble. Detective Gomez found Derek's first wife, and she's willing to testify. Claire's breath caught. His first wife, her name is Rebecca Sullivan. She was married to Derek 10 years ago before he made his fortune. He put her in the hospital twice, once pushed her downstairs, once strangled her until she lost consciousness. She took a settlement with an NDA rather than prosecute. But she saw the news about what happened to you, and she's ready to break that NDA and tell the truth. For the first time since the psychiatric evaluation, Claire felt something besides despair. She felt hope. I'm on my way, she said, pulling out of the parking lot with her security detail following close behind. I'll be there in 20 minutes. As she drove through the city streets, Claire pressed one hand to her belly where Jonah was still kicking. Hang on. "Little one," she whispered, "we're not done fighting yet, not by a long shot." That night, lying in her temporary housing, Claire made a decision. She wasn't taking the settlement. She wasn't giving up. She was going to fight Derek with everything she had, even if it destroyed her in the process. Because if she gave up now, he'd know that he could hurt anyone, threaten anyone, and get away with it as long as he had enough money and influence. And that was a lesson she refused to teach her child. At 8 months pregnant, Claire could barely sleep. The baby pressed against her ribs. But more than physical discomfort, anxiety kept her awake about the meeting, about Derek's custody filing, about the future narrowing with each day. She arrived at the precinct at 8:45. Detective Gomez met them at the door, expressions somewhere between grim and cautiously hopeful. "We found Derek's first wife," she said without preamble. Claire stopped walking. "What?" "Her name is Rebecca Sullivan, now remarried after divorce. She signed an NDA as part of settlement, which is why we couldn't find her initially. But we tracked her through property records." Detective Gomez led them to a conference room where Michael Hartford and Rebecca Thorne waited. "She's willing to break the NDA and testify." "Why would she risk that?" "Because she saw the news and realized Derek was doing to you exactly what he did to her." Detective Gomez opened a file. Rebecca was married to Derek for 3 years in his early 20s before he made his fortune. According to her testimony, he was controlling, manipulative, physically violent. She has hospital records documenting 2 separate incidents, one where he pushed her downstairs, another where he strangled her until she lost consciousness. Claire felt sick. He did that to someone else and got away with it. Rebecca filed charges after the strangulation, but Derek's lawyers convinced her to accept settlement instead of trial. $5 million in NDA in exchange for dropping charges and never speaking about the marriage. Detective Gomez closed the file. She's been living quietly in Connecticut for 10 years, remarried, has 2 kids, built a new life. But when she saw what happened to you, she couldn't stay silent. "This is huge," Rebecca Thorne said energetically. "A pattern of domestic violence completely undermines Derek's defense. If he did it before, the jury will believe he did it again. But won't Derek's lawyers argue Rebecca violated the NDA, that her testimony is inadmissible? They'll try, but NDAs can't cover up crimes. If Rebecca's testimony establishes criminal behavior pattern, the agreement becomes void." Rebecca Thorne smiled grimly. "Stuart Grant will fight hard, but we finally have a real weapon." Claire felt relief so intense it made her dizzy. "When can we meet her?" "Tomorrow. She's driving down from Connecticut." Detective Gomez hesitated. "But there's something else." The detective pulled out another file, thicker. "While investigating Rebecca, we looked deeper into Brennan Innovations' finances. We found irregularities." "What kind?" Michael asked. "The kind suggesting Derek's been embezzling company funds. Significant amounts, millions of dollars transferred through shell corporations into offshore accounts." Detective Gomez spread financial statements across the table. "He's been doing it at least 2 years, possibly longer. Some money was used to pay off witnesses who changed their statements about the train station." Claire stared at the numbers. "He was stealing from his own company and from investors. If this comes out, he's not just looking at assault charges, he's looking at federal fraud, wire fraud, securities fraud, possibly tax evasion." Detective Gomez met her eyes. "This changes everything. Claire, Derek isn't just an abusive husband. He's a criminal. And men facing that kind of prison time get desperate. Meaning you need to be very careful. The custody filing wasn't just control, it was leverage. If he can get custody of your baby, he has a bargaining chip for plea deal or reduced charges." Michael's expression darkened. He'd use his own child as leverage. He tried to kill his pregnant wife. Using a baby for leverage is barely a footnote. Detective Gomez's voice was flat. "I've seen cases like this. The more cornered he feels, the more dangerous he becomes." Claire's hand went to her belly protectively. "What do I do?" "Prepare for the custody hearing. Stay in secure locations. Don't go anywhere alone." Detective Gomez's expression softened slightly. "And trust that we're building a case that will put Derek Brennan behind bars for a very long time." The meeting with Rebecca Sullivan happened the next afternoon in Michael Hartford's private office. Rebecca was late 30s, petite and pretty in a way that reminded Claire painfully of herself. She sat across from Claire and spoke in a quiet, steady voice about the worst 3 years of her life. He was charming at first, Rebecca said. Attentive, romantic, everything you'd want. But once we married, things changed. He needed to know where I was every moment, who I talked to, what I spent. He isolated me from friends and family, convinced me they didn't have my best interests at heart. That's exactly what he did to me, Claire whispered. And when you started to push back, when you questioned him, Rebecca's voice hardened. That's when violence started. First grabbing my arm too hard, then pushing during arguments. Then she stopped, closing her eyes. The first time he put me in the hospital, he cried, begged forgiveness, swore it would never happen again. I believed him. How long before it happened again? 6 weeks. This time more careful bruises where clothing covered, injuries explainable as accidents. Rebecca set down her coffee. The second hospitalization was when he strangled me. I passed out. When I woke, he was gone. I called police, filed charges. Then his lawyer showed up with a settlement I couldn't refuse. $5 million. All I had to do was sign an NDA and disappear. You took it. I was terrified. I had no money, no job, no support. He'd destroyed all of that systematically over 3 years. Rebecca met Claire's eyes. I told myself I'd start over somewhere safe, that the money would let me build a new life. And it did. But it also meant Derek got away with everything. I've lived with that guilt every day since. You're here now. You're willing to testify. Because I saw the news and realized I could have prevented what he did to you. If I'd been brave enough to testify 10 years ago, he'd have been in prison instead of free to hurt someone else. Rebecca's voice cracked. I can't undo my mistake, but I can make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else ever again. Rebecca Thorne, the lawyer, leaned forward. The custody hearing is in 2 days. Rebecca's testimony establishes violence pattern. Combined with the financial crimes investigation, we have a strong case to deny Derek any custody or visitation. But he'll fight it, Claire said. Of course, but for the first time, we're fighting from strength instead of weakness. Rebecca Thorne allowed a small smile. Derek Brennan is about to learn that all his money and lawyers can't change truth. The custody hearing was held on a gray Tuesday. Claire arrived with her legal team and security detail. Derek was already there with Stuart Grant, looking confident, composed, every inch the successful businessman wrongly accused. Judge Patricia Coleman, known for no-nonsense approach to family law, listened to Stuart Grant's opening argument that Claire was mentally unstable, living in insecure housing, unable to provide safe environment with polite skepticism. Then Rebecca Thorne stood and called her first witness, Rebecca Sullivan. The courtroom went silent as Derek's first wife walked to the stand. Derek's face went white, then red. He leaned to whisper urgently to Stuart Grant, who looked equally shocked. They clearly hadn't known Rebecca was breaking her NDA. Rebecca testified for an hour, describing escalating abuse, hospitalizations, death threats, the settlement that bought her silence. She brought hospital records, police reports from 10 years ago, photographs of injuries. Did Derek Brennan ever threaten to kill you? Rebecca Thorne asked. Yes, multiple times. The last time was when I said I was leaving. He said if I walked out, he'd make sure I never felt safe again, that he'd destroy me so completely no one would believe anything I said. Rebecca looked directly at Derek. It took 10 years to stop being afraid, but I'm not afraid anymore. Stuart Grant's cross-examination was aggressive, focusing on the NDA, settlement money, Rebecca's financial motivation. But Rebecca remained calm and consistent, testimony unshakable. When Dr. Shepard took the stand describing Claire's injuries, and Detective Gomez testified about the financial crimes investigation, the case began to feel winnable. Then Stuart Grant called his surprise witness, Vanessa Price. Derek's COO walked to the stand in a tasteful black suit, expression appropriately sorrowful. She testified she'd been like a sister to Claire, that she'd watched Claire's mental health deteriorate during pregnancy, that she'd begged Derek to get his wife help. Did you ever have an affair with Derek Brennan? Rebecca Thorne demanded during cross-examination. Absolutely not. Derek loved his wife. He was devoted to her. Vanessa's voice was steady, sincere. The relationship between Derek and myself is purely professional. Claire's accusations stem from her paranoid delusions. Then explain the hotel receipts. Business dinners that ran late. Derek often entertains clients at hotels because they offer privacy for sensitive negotiations. There's nothing inappropriate. Rebecca Thorne tried to press, but without the investigator's photos, she had no proof. Vanessa left the stand looking credible and concerned, having expertly undermined Claire's accusations. The hearing concluded with Judge Coleman reserving judgment. I'll issue ruling within 48 hours. Until then, Mr. Brennan, you continue to have no contact. Mrs. Brennan, you continue psychiatric treatment as ordered. Court adjourned. Claire left feeling hollowed out. They'd made progress. Rebecca Sullivan's testimony was powerful, but Vanessa's lies had damaged credibility, and Derek had sat through it looking like the victim. That night, Claire went into early labor. The stress, fear, constant pressure finally took its toll. Her water broke at 2 in the morning. Security rushed her to Mount Sinai, where Dr. Shepard was waiting. You're at 37 weeks. Early but not dangerously so. Baby should be fine. But Claire, your blood pressure is dangerously high. We need to stabilize you before delivery. The labor lasted 14 hours. Claire had never felt pain like this, waves of agony that made the train platform seem almost gentle. She screamed, she cried, she begged for relief. Through it all, she kept thinking about Derek, about the fact he'd created this child then tried to murder them both, about the possibility a judge might give him custody. When the baby finally came, a boy with dark hair and strong lungs, Claire held him and felt terror instead of joy. His name is Jonah, she whispered. Jonah Michael Brennan. He's perfect, Dr. Shepard assured her. Healthy weight, strong heartbeat, no complications despite early delivery. Derek can't have him. Promise me Derek can't have him. We'll make sure. The door opened. Derek walked in, flanked by Stuart Grant and a hospital administrator. He carried flowers, wore a concerned fatherhood expression that made Claire want to scream. Claire, Shada, he said softly, moving toward the bed. I heard you were in labor. I came as soon as I could. Get out. Claire held Jonah closer. You don't get to be here. The judge said no contact. The baby isn't part of the restraining order, Stuart Grant said smoothly. Mr. Brennan has right to meet his son. The hell he does. Actually, the hospital administrator said apologetically. Since there's no formal custody order, we can't legally deny a father access to his newborn. I'm sorry. Mrs. Brennan. Claire watched, helpless, as Derek approached. He reached for Jonah, and every instinct screamed to run, to protect her baby from this man who'd tried to kill them both. But Derek was performing for the lawyer, for the administrator, for inevitable court filings that would use this moment as evidence of devoted fatherhood. He held Jonah with practiced gentleness, expression tender. Then he leaned close to Claire and whispered, Beautiful boy. It would be a shame if something happened to him because his mother was too unstable to keep him safe. Claire felt her heart stop. You're threatening our baby. I'm protecting my son from a dangerous woman. Derek handed Jonah back. I'll be filing for emergency custody based on your early labor induced by mental distress. Stuart, please document that the mother appears agitated and potentially dangerous to the child. They left quickly. Derek's performance complete. Claire held Jonah and shook so hard nurses came running. That night, lying in the hospital bed with Jonah sleeping in her arms, Claire received a text from an unknown number. Take the settlement, $2 million, sign the NDA, disappear, otherwise custody battle will destroy you and you'll lose him anyway. You have 24 hours to decide. Claire looked at her son's perfect sleeping face and understood exactly what Derek was doing. He was giving her a choice, her child or her truth, her safety or her justice, her survival, or the possibility other women might be protected. It was the same choice Rebecca Sullivan had faced. Claire closed her eyes, pressed her lips to Jonah's forehead, and made the hardest decision of her life. She wasn't taking the settlement. The federal charges against Derek came swiftly. Within a week of Jonah's birth, the U.S. Attorney's Office filed 15 counts wire fraud, 7 counts securities fraud, 5 counts witness tampering. Sarah Mitchell from the U.S. Attorney's office visited Claire in the hospital. We've been building a case against your husband for months. The evidence Detective Gomez provided was the missing piece. We're filing charges today. What does that mean for custody? It means Derek Brennan has much bigger problems than a custody battle. Federal charges carry mandatory minimums. If convicted, he's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Sarah opened her briefcase. But we need your testimony. Everything you know about his finances, his threats, his attempts to bribe witnesses. With your testimony and Rebecca Sullivan's, we can build an ironclad case. If I testify, he'll destroy me in custody battle. If you testify, there won't be a custody battle. A man facing federal prison time isn't getting custody of anyone. Sarah leaned forward. I know you're tired. I know you're scared. But this is bigger than you and Jonah. Derek Brennan defrauded investors out of millions. He used that money to obstruct justice, threaten victims, buy his way out of accountability. You have power to stop him permanently. Claire looked around at all these people who believed in her. Michael, who'd funded her defense. Detective Gomez, who'd spent months building the case. Dr. Shepard, who'd documented every injury. Rebecca Thorne, who'd fought even when odds seemed impossible. And she thought about Rebecca Sullivan, who'd taken the settlement and spent 10 years living with guilt that her silence enabled Derek to hurt someone else. If I testify, Derek will never forgive me. He'll spend the rest of his life finding ways to punish me. Yes, Sarah said simply. That's what men like him do. But he'll be doing it from prison, where his ability to cause harm is significantly limited. Claire picked up the settlement agreement, all those pages representing safety and silence. Then she set it down and looked at Sarah Mitchell. Tell me what you need. The next 72 hours were a blur of depositions, document reviews, strategic planning. Sarah Mitchell proved to be exactly the prosecutor Derek should have feared: methodical, relentless, immune to charm or intimidation. She built a federal case brick by brick, connecting Derek's financial crimes to his witness bribing, showing how he'd used stolen investor money to fund his defense. The arraignment was a media circus. Cameras caught Derek in handcuffs being led into federal court while reporters shouted questions. His carefully maintained image as successful businessman crumbled in real time. The charges were read: 15 counts, wire fraud; 7 counts, securities fraud; 5 counts, witness tampering. Bail was set at $5 million. Derek posted it within hours, but the damage was done. His investors abandoned him. His board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove him as CEO. Brennan Innovation's stock price collapsed. Everything he'd built over 15 years disintegrated in less than a week. And through it all, Claire testified. She sat in the witness chair and told the truth about everything: hotel receipts, affair, threats, push at train station, whispered warning when he'd held Jonah. She spoke calmly, factually, answering every question from Sarah Mitchell and enduring every attack from Stuart Grant's cross-examination. Mrs. Brennan, isn't it true you've been diagnosed with anxiety disorder? Yes, at my husband's insistence, after he convinced me I was mentally unstable. My current psychiatrist believes I was suffering from trauma responses to emotional abuse, not inherent mental illness. Isn't it true you hired a private investigator? Yes, because he was lying about his whereabouts, and I deserve to know the truth. Isn't it true you've benefited financially from Michael Hartford's support? I've accepted help from someone who prevented my murder. Yes, I don't consider survival a benefit, I consider it a right. Every answer was designed to reclaim her narrative from Derek's gaslighting. And slowly, painfully, truth began emerging from beneath manipulation layers. Rebecca Sullivan's testimony about violence pattern, Dr. Shepard's medical evidence, Detective Gomez's investigation into witness tampering, the federal prosecutor's financial records showing exactly how Derek had stolen millions and used them to obstruct justice. The federal trial took 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Derek's defense tried arguing he'd been framed, that Claire and Michael Hartford had conspired to destroy him out of revenge and business rivalry. But financial records didn't lie, and witnesses, especially Rebecca Sullivan and Claire, were unshakable. The jury deliberated 6 hours before returning verdict, guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge imposed 20 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole before 15 years served, asset forfeiture of everything Derek owned: penthouse, company stock, offshore accounts, Restitution payments to defrauded investors totaling $40 million. Claire wasn't in the courtroom when sentence was read. She was in a small apartment in a quiet Connecticut town, holding Jonah and watching news coverage. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just exhaustion and hollow relief. It was over. Finally, impossibly, over. 6 months after Derek's sentencing, Claire stood in a kitchen that smelled of coffee and salt air, watching dawn break over Long Island Sound. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, galley kitchen, second-hand furniture, but it was hers, paid for with victims' compensation and Michael Hartford's continued support. Jonah slept in a crib near the window, his small chest rising and falling with peaceful rhythm. Claire checked on him compulsively. The therapist said it would take time before she stopped expecting Derek to somehow reach through darkness and steal her child. Her phone buzzed. Rebecca Sullivan. Coffee this morning. I'm in the area. They met at a small cafe overlooking the water. Jonah content in his carrier. I saw the news coverage of Derek's first appeal being denied. Rebecca said, how are you handling it? Better than expected. I keep waiting to feel afraid. But mostly I just feel tired. Claire wrapped her hands around her mug. The therapist says I'm still processing trauma, that it'll take years. She's right. I'm 10 years out and still processing. Rebecca smiled wryly. But it gets easier. Nightmares become less frequent. Hypervigilance fades. You start believing you're actually safe. Do you ever regret testifying, breaking the NDA? Never. Best decision I ever made. Rebecca looked at the water. I spent a decade living with knowledge that my silence enabled Derek to hurt you. Nothing was worth that guilt. Now I can look at myself without wanting to apologize. Claire understood that feeling. She'd spent so many years apologizing to Derek for imagined slights, to herself for not leaving sooner. Now she was learning to exist without apology. Michael Hartford called yesterday, Claire said, he wants to fund a domestic violence advocacy nonprofit. Asked if I'd be willing to speak at fundraising events. Share my story. Are you ready for that? I don't know. Part of me wants to help other women, but part of me just wants to disappear. Raise Jonah somewhere quiet. Never think about Derek again. Both impulses are valid, Rebecca said gently. You don't owe anyone your story. You don't owe anyone your trauma. Whatever you decide, make sure it's for you. They talked for another hour, comparing strategies for managing anxiety attacks and single motherhood logistics. When they parted, Claire felt lighter. The apartment felt peaceful when she returned. She put Jonah down for his nap and stood in the kitchen, looking at the life she was slowly building from ruins. It wasn't glamorous. She was living on victims' compensation and doing freelance marketing from home, carefully rebuilding the career Derek had convinced her to abandon. But it was hers. Every decision, every choice, every moment belonged to her. Her phone rang. Detective Gomez. Claire, I wanted to update you. Vanessa Price was just arrested. Claire's heart jumped. For what? Conspiracy to commit fraud. Turns out she wasn't just Derek's mistress, she was his partner in the embezzlement scheme. She helped him set up shell corporations, move money offshore. Federal prosecutors have been building a separate case. Detective Gomez sounded satisfied. She's looking at 10 to 15 years. Good, Claire said simply. Then, surprising herself, I hope she gets the full 15. After the call ended, Claire sat at her laptop and opened a document she'd been working on for weeks. A memoir. Her story, in her own words, without Derek's gaslighting or Stuart Grant's cross-examination or media speculation. She'd titled it, Shattered Trust: How I Survived My Husband's Attempt to Kill Me. The words came easier now. For months, every sentence felt like dragging broken glass across her skin. But slowly, the process became cathartic. Writing down the truth was a way of taking ownership, of refusing to let Derek control the narrative even from prison. She wrote about the golden cage of their marriage, the subtle isolation and control. She wrote about finding hotel receipts and hiring the private investigator. She wrote about confronting him at his office and the bruises on her wrist and the text message summoning her to Grand Central. She wrote about the moment on the platform, the push, the fall, Michael Hartford's hand catching her before she hit the rails. And she wrote about the aftermath legal battles, custody threats, Rebecca Sullivan's courage, the federal trial. She wrote about learning to survive without apology, about slowly rebuilding a self that Derek had tried to destroy. The manuscript was almost done. Claire had sent early chapters to a literary agent who specialized in true crime and memoir. The response had been immediate and enthusiastic. This is powerful. This is important. Women need to hear this story. Claire wasn't sure if she was ready for the exposure publishing would bring, but she was sure of one thing: she refused to let Derek's version become the official record. Refused to let him be remembered as the successful businessman unfairly destroyed by a vindictive wife, rather than the violent criminal who'd tried to murder a pregnant woman. The truth mattered, and Claire was going to make sure the truth was told. That evening, Michael Hartford came by for his monthly visit. He'd been remarkably consistent, checking in regularly, offering support without being intrusive, respecting Claire's need for space. "You're looking better," he said, accepting coffee and settling into the worn armchair. "More rested." Jonah finally started sleeping through the night. "It's life-changing." Claire sat across from him. "Michael, I've been thinking. You've done so much, paid for lawyers, funded this apartment, supported me financially while I get back on my feet. I need to start paying you back." "That's not necessary." "It is for me. I can't build a new life while still being dependent on someone else's generosity." Michael considered this, then nodded. "All right, when you're ready, when you are earning enough from consulting work, we'll work out a repayment plan. But Claire, I didn't help you because I expected repayment. I helped you because it was right. I know, but accepting help is different than being dependent. I need to stand on my own eventually. You already are standing on your own. You testified against a man who tried to kill you. You fought for custody. You've survived everything Derek threw at you." Michael's voice was firm. "The money is just resources. You did all the hard work yourself." Before he left, he handed her an envelope. "A letter from Rebecca Sullivan. She wanted me to give it to you." After Michael left, Claire opened it. Rebecca's handwriting was neat. "Dear Claire, I've been thinking about courage, what it means, what it tests, what it accomplishes, for 10 years. I thought courage meant taking Derek's settlement and building a new life far away. But watching you fight him, watching you testify despite all the threats and attacks, that's when I understood what real courage looks like. You could have taken his settlement. You could have disappeared with Jonah. Instead, you chose the harder path. You didn't just save yourself. You saved everyone Derek would have hurt in the future. Your testimony put him in prison where he belongs. Your courage gave me permission to finally confront my own cowardice. Thank you for fighting when it would have been easier to surrender. Thank you for proving that truth is stronger than money, and courage is stronger than fear. With admiration and friendship." Rebecca Claire read the letter 3 times, tears streaming. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her memoir manuscript, a reminder of why this story needed telling. That night, after Jonah was asleep, Claire stood at her window looking out at the water. The sound was dark and vast, reflecting scattered lights from distant shores. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, the successful marketing director who'd fallen for a charming entrepreneur, who'd believed his promises. That woman would barely recognize Claire Brennan now. Single mother, survivor, woman rebuilding her life one careful day at a time. Scarred but not broken. Damaged but not destroyed. The baby monitor crackled with Jonah's soft breathing. Claire pressed her hand against the window glass, feeling the cold night air beyond it, and allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not desperate hope that Derek would change, that the marriage would work, but quieter, steadier hope that she could build a good life for herself and her son. That trauma would fade even if it never fully disappeared. That someday she'd wake up without immediately checking locks and looking over her shoulder. Her phone buzzed. An email from her literary agent. "Publisher wants to make an offer on the memoir. They're very excited. Call me tomorrow." Claire smiled. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning to be told on her terms. In her words, without anyone else's permission. She opened the manuscript, reading the final paragraph she'd written earlier. "People ask if I've healed. The answer is complicated. I haven't forgotten what happened. I never will. I still have nightmares about the train platform. I still flinch at sudden movements. I still check locks 3 times before bed, but I've also learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting or pretending trauma never happened. It means carrying scars and building a life anyway. It means choosing hope even when fear seems more rational. It means believing you deserve safety and peace even when someone powerful told you otherwise. Derek Brennan tried to kill me. He failed. And his failure doesn't just mean I survived, it means every woman he might have hurt in the future is safe from him. That's not a small thing. That's everything. To the women reading this who are in situations like mine, you are not crazy. You are not overreacting. You are not imagining the danger. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Find people who believe you. And know that survival is not weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. My name is Claire Brennan. I survived attempted murder by my husband. This is my story, told in my own words, and no one can ever take it away from me again. Claire saved the document and closed her laptop. Tomorrow she'd call her agent. Tomorrow she'd keep building her new life. Tomorrow she'd wake up free. But tonight she just sat in the peaceful quiet of her apartment, listening to her son breathe, and let herself believe in the possibility of a future that belonged entirely to her. The coastal wind picked up outside, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. Claire wrapped her arms around herself and thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, terrified, trapped, convinced she had no way out. If she could go back and tell that woman anything, it would be this: you're stronger than you know. The road ahead is hard, but you can walk it. And on the other side of this nightmare, there's a life worth living, a life you'll build yourself, in your own image, according to your own rules. A life where peace isn't just the absence of violence, but the presence of joy, purpose, connection, and hope. A life worth fighting for. Claire smiled at the dark water beyond her window and went inside to finish her evening dishes to wash. Tomorrow's lunch to pack. The simple domestic rituals of a life finally, fully her own. And somewhere into the distance, thunder rolled over the water, a reminder that storms would always come. But she'd already survived the worst one. Everything else was just weather. She checked on Jonah one more time, his small face peaceful in sleep, and whispered, "We made it, little one. We're safe now, and we're going to be okay." For the first time since that terrible day at Grand Central Station, Claire Brennan believed it.